Okay.
Okay, Eva, thank you very much for joining me. Pleasure to have you. Yeah, so I mean, not to worry. I mean, because I'm going to edit this, I'll cut out some bits, so we're just going to ease into this. So yeah, welcome
Thanks,
again.
Bio. Thank you, Bio. Thank you for inviting me. So glad we're chatting.
My
Yeah.
pleasure. Yeah, so let's kick off with your background. Tell us about Eva, about her background. Let's know you, please.
Yeah. So I was born in Singapore. I lived there till, like I was in my as a young adult actually, quite young, and then I emigrated. I came over to the United Kingdom, like a lot of people in Southeast Asia, Malaysia and Singapore especially, to study. And I've been here since. I came here in the 1990s, early 1990s. So it's been a long time that I've been in this country. But, I straddle two worlds. As I say in my bio, I always say that, I live in two worlds, which I do. Yeah, and I call Singapore home. I also call London home. So that's
Mm.
me in a nutshell. Yeah, without getting into the the nitty gritty in between.
I get yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess what we can also do is get a bit more info about your works in the arts. So, how did your
Hmm.
journey start in terms of children's book writing? How did you get into that?
Um, it's a bit of a kind of a long story, so I'll try to be as succinct as I possibly can. So my older daughter is now 25. So when she was born, I as all parents do, they buy their children books. As a reader myself, I was very excited, and I started to collect a mass of picture books actually, and I still have them. And this collection is growing all the time. So I've been collecting picture books for 25 years since her birth. So it starts from, like, those cloth books to board books to, hardbacks, softbacks, and but I never really thought I could write picture books. Then my second daughter was born, and I did the same. We would read the books that I bought her older sister, and my two children are 8 years apart. So one day, my younger one says to me that, why aren't there people like me in books? And that kind of struck me because I never thought about it before. I mean, my children are mixed race, or come from dual heritages. So I thought, yeah, why aren't there people like you in books? And so I thought, I did try to find these books. A lot of them exist in Asia, or maybe in Chinese, in other languages, but not in English. And my children and I only read in English. So I guess I embarked on thinking. I mean, I thought to myself that maybe I should write these books. Maybe I can do something about it, leave my children a legacy. So I guess that's how it started. And then we moved back to Singapore again between 2013 and 2020, because my husband had a job there. And I think my writing journey actually started there. I was commissioned to write a book, for a film producer, and it started rolling from there. And then I got more commissions. Yeah, in a nutshell. So, but I never really saw myself at first. I didn't see myself as a writer, because I never read any books that were written by people like me. They were
Mm.
all written by, a lot of them were British or American writers. Um, so that there wasn't that diversity and representation when I was growing up, and
Mm.
especially when my children were growing up too. Yeah.
Hmm. I'm curious to find out though. Yeah, so there weren't a lot of books, or there weren't any, if at all, that were written by Southeast Asians in English. But I'm guessing there are books, or there were books back
Yeah.
then written by Southeast Asians in, so
Yes.
for example, in Chinese, and you can find them in China, but not
Yeah.
in English. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there in Singapore, where I come from, there are four official languages. There's
Mm.
Malay, which is the indigenous language, Chinese, um, obviously English, and we have Tamil, which is an official language. Although the South Asians in Singapore speak more than just Tamil. They speak Punjabi as well, and other Indian languages. It's just that the government of Singapore chose Tamil to be the official Indian language. So there are these books written in these languages too, and they're mostly, about Singapore, or for, like stories that Singaporeans can relate to,
Hmm.
right? Um, I was reading in English when I was growing up, and most of the books that I read were written by British writers like Enid Blyton, and the classics and all that.
Mhm,
I mean, classics as in, what were classics in those days.
mhm,
Um, and it was very incongruent, right, to the my atmosphere, to the weather even that I was living in. Or I would read books about children, having picnics, and it's too hot to have a picnic in Singapore, obviously. Or I would read books, like, there'll be snow or something, and like the Narnia adventures.
mm,
There'll be snow, and there'll be hailstorm, and I could not imagine how
mm,
cold that could be until I came to England, right? you know. Yeah. So yeah, it was really incongruent. But I'd read these books. I never questioned them. I never said, "Oh, what? Why aren't there people like me in them?"
mhm,
Until my second one, he said that to me, and it kind of knocked me over, bowled me over. Yeah.
mhm. Yeah, that's interesting. So you took it upon yourself to start writing books like those,
Yeah.
with characters that the kids could relate to, or even yourself can relate to. Um, and also, you've gone yeah, so you went professional at some point as a children's book writer, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What would you consider your standout moments then, since going professional?
Um, I think I've several, because I was published in Singapore before becoming a published author in England, right? So as I said, I lived there between 2013 and 2020. And in 2020, when we moved back to England, again, I started to uh, consider, like, getting an agent, because here in the UK and the USA, to get trade published, you will need an agent, right? So I thought, okay, I think this is where I want to go. I want to write more stories. um, I needed to get an agent, and so I started querying at that point. I think my break. What was your question again? What's
Um,
my...
yeah, your standout moments in your career, the highlights of your career since you've gone professional.
Oh, okay. So, like a big break in a sense, right? I think
Yes.
getting an agent, was a break for me, because then, she was able to then submit my stories to, the trade publishers in the UK. Um, yeah, I think I would say that that's a break for me, and it means that, someone out there, an agent, kind of liked my writing enough, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I wasn't thinking of going the self-publishing way. That wasn't a decision I made, because I was very lazy. I didn't want to do the distribution, the sales. I just wanted to write.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't, I didn't want to be, um, like, I didn't want the business side to complicate it for me, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I understand. I mean, and you're not alone. I remember even for the interview that I had with Tita Beredo, she'd mentioned finding an agent as the high one of the high points of her
Mm,
career. And
mm,
I didn't know that getting an agent was a huge thing until I moved here also and started dabbling into the children's book industry, because I'd always self-published, and even right now I'm still self-publishing my books because I enjoy
mhm.
wearing multiple hats, the business hats and the rest of
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
Yeah,
fabulous.
but one of the things that happened before I came for the conference in 2022 now, which was my first Scooby conference, was
Mm.
I submitted an application for the one-to-one sessions
Oh,
with
yeah.
the
Yes.
agents. Yes, because I wanted
Mm,
to get my manuscript vetted by someone else. And
mm,
then they sent me they sent me like a requirements about writing a query letter and stuff like that. I'd never heard about anything of, like a query letter. So I did a lot
Yeah,
of googling. I did a lot of googling, put one together and things like that. So I definitely do understand now what it means, to land an agent. How it can be, a high point for any prospective author, or in this environment at least. So that's an
yeah.
interesting one. Yeah. So let's go back to your cultural influences now. You've talked a lot about Southeast Asia, Singapore, China. I'm curious though, what influences those have on your works?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, China I say that in my bio, doesn't it? Don't I? About my ancestors having come from China. So I would say I'm ethnic Chinese. So if that's my racial identification, I also have some indigenous blood in the family. I'm part Malay. My great great grandmother was a Malay woman. So that's kind of that mix that we get in Singapore and Malaysia. But as a racial identity, I I've been trained or told to say that I'm ethnic Chinese because
Okay.
my father is that way too. It's a bit complicated, the racial relations in colonial countries, I would say, or ex-colonial countries, because
Yep.
our race, I mean, in Singapore especially, the racial categories are actually very colonial. Like
Mm.
here in England, we have BAME, right?
Yeah.
BAME. There in Singapore, we have CMIO, Chinese, Malay, Indian, other,
Mm.
and other has always bothered me, but it's how it is. It's kind of like a mirror of the colonial racial categories.
Hmm.
So my cultural references or my cultural influences, the influences of or the flavors of Southeast Asia.
Mm.
They're Chinese, there's Malay, it's a bit Eurasian or European, and I put that all into my stories, or as much as I can. um, so for example, my picture book, I love Chinese New Year.
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, thank you. um, Although it's a Chinese family that's celebrating Chinese New Year, and it's supposedly set in the Western world in
Mm-hmm.
this story, right? So Dublin is mentioned, and you don't really see where the family is from, And I was writing with that in mind, of the diaspora, the Chinese diaspora, we are so spread out all over the world, and we celebrate Chinese New Year wherever we are. We
Mm-hmm.
could be in Colombia, Cuba, you know, um, Australia, the United States, even Nigeria. I mean,
Mm.
there are Chinese people in Nigeria. And I actually have a Chinese friend long, long time ago, and he's Nigerian, or born in
Oh,
Nigeria, actually. Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, very interesting, isn't it? So, I mean, I think with this internalization or globalization of the world, and with a population size that is the Chinese. I mean, there are like 1.3 billion of us.
I know. Yeah.
Everywhere you go, there are Chinese people,
I
right?
know.
And the festivities are the same.
Mm.
So in that book, I tried to kind of reflect that for the Chinese people all over the world reading that book, to
Mm.
their children, and also for people who want to understand Chinese New Year or the Lunar New Year,
Yeah, like
as a
myself. Yeah.
festive, yeah, as a
Mm-hmm.
festivity and as a festival. Yeah.
Hmm.
So yeah, so I would say that where I come from, going back to your question again, being a Southeast Asian person of Chinese descent, I'm very much influenced by my culture and my background as such. Yeah.
Hmm. Interesting. Uh, and then from an artistic point of view, do you have any specific influences? Like, do you have any artist or writer whose works you really like? Someone of Southeast Asian background that you always that you refer to or that you cite as your reference.
Oh, let me think. I mean, for illustrators, there are quite a few, I would say, that come from the same background as me,
Hmm.
and they would be they're mostly spread out all over the world. There's one in
Hmm.
Canada that I really like, and one in the USA whose art I really love, and they also self-reference their identities as ethnic Chinese from Southeast Asia in their
Mhm.
artworks.
Mhm.
Um, as far as books are concerned,
Mhm.
um, I couldn't really say there are books that have influenced me written by Southeast Asians, because there are so few of us writing, especially in the children's writing world.
Mhm.
I'm not saying that they don't exist. They do, but there are
Mhm.
just so few of us.
Mhm.
And in the UK, Southeast Asia is considered the Far East, So even though Malaysia and Singapore have got colonial ties, much like Nigeria and, have with the UK, we're very far away, as far
Mm.
as, in the eye of publishing, I would
Okay.
say, in this country. Um, so I mean, I would love to see more Southeast Asian stories out there and more Southeast Asian writers writing.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think this goes back to something that I saw on your website. I'm trying to recollect, and I think I must have read that there's only one or two of you that you've come across. I think I may have read something like that,
Mm.
on your
Yeah,
blog.
yeah. I mean, as far as I know, in the UK at least, I mean, what another Southeast Asian published author that I know really
Mhm.
well, and I've read almost all her books, is Candy Gourlay, and she's from the Philippines,
I
right?
know Candy,
And
yeah.
yeah, Candy, and I think I think I would. And then there's another author whose book is coming out soon, called Kat Akido. So these are the two Filipinos that I know. I mean, I apologize in advance if I've not named anyone else, but as far as my circle is concerned, Kat and Candy. As
Mm.
Southeast Asians, there are many Malaysians and, or authors with who are half Malaysians. Let's just say, one of their parents is Malaysian.
Mhm.
Um, these are authors, children's authors. I'm referring to. They are coming out, and you will, you'll find their books out soon. There's Lucy Tandon Cobb, and she is half Malaysian, half British. Actually, I don't really like half half. I think we're whole of everything, right? But but
I understand.
she's dual heritage is what I meant, and her books are about dual heritage children. So
Mhm.
people like her in books, which are very very rare actually, and
Hmm.
I'm really looking forward to her picture books coming out soon. Um, I mean, there are also quite a few others. I don't know if I'm answering your question now. I've kind of rattled
Yes.
on now.
Yeah, I mean, you
Yeah,
are. I mean, you are. I mean, and that's the thing. It's an extension of even my question, which is if you have any illustrators or writers that you want to cite, and you've cited a few of them. Candy Goulet, for example, whom again I've only known via my attendance of the
yeah,
Scooby
yeah,
conference, and I also
yes.
bought one of her books. I think the first conference I attended, I had bought one of her books also.
Oh,
So,
she's
mhm.
great. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention an East Asian author of British Chinese heritage is Maisie Chan. Maisie Chan is a multiple award-winning author, and she is really the voice and the impetus behind East and Southeast Asian authors in the UK.
Hmm.
Representation wise, and I mean, she writes some middle grade books, yeah, and she's someone to look out for, actually, Maisie Chan.
Okay, interesting. I'll make a note of that and see if I could even reach out to her.
Yeah,
Yeah, so given your travels also, I mean, I'd want to learn about how you've navigated, as an artist, well, as a writer across, different environments. So how have you been able to fit in, in the UK, and then when you go to Singapore or Malaysia or China, so yeah, coming from these different cultural backgrounds, how have you been able to navigate life as a creative across these different places?
that's a great question. I mean, I feel like I am quite a global person, or international Singaporean, I would say. I mean, as in, I actually don't really see countries as divides.
Hmm.
I I try to find the similarities in all in every of the country that I've been to. Um, like for example, I have family in Italy. That's because my husband's Italian, and so we've kind of live off. We travel there quite often. It's as if we are living there, here and there, in the sense that, even though we've never permanently lived in Italy, but we go there so often, it's become home, like to me, right? And for about 4 years we had lived in France, and
Mm.
so and it was there that I also started to write, pre-published. I was writing a lot at that time, for children, and reading a lot of picture books in French, to my kids who were learning French, and I was also
Okay.
learning the language with them. And I think what makes a writer or an art form relatable, or writing or as an art form or any art form relatable, is it's the universality of it. So it can be any story that you read, but any, or that you write, for example,
Mhm.
and anywhere in the world that people read this story, they can relate to something. Like, I
Mhm.
love Chinese New Year. It's a very ethnic kind of story, isn't it? I mean, centered on a Chinese girl and her family. But
Mhm.
anywhere in the world, every one of us celebrates a festival,
Yeah.
and so we can relate to, like, during a festival, we have family around us, we have
Mhm.
plenty of food, there are
Mhm.
things that we do. So, it doesn't matter where you are in the world,
Mm.
if a book has universal qualities or
Mhm.
themes,
Mhm.
anyone can read it.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean,
Sure.
I read all the books that had nothing to do with me and my culture, and I still related to them, right, when I
Many
was
of
a
us
child.
did.
Yeah,
Yeah, same
yeah,
here. Yeah,
exactly.
same here.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you mentioned Enid Blyton, I thought that's the famous five, the author behind
Yes,
famous five, right?
exactly.
Because I read, I mean, I must have read all the
Yeah,
famous fives,
yeah,
out there when I
yeah,
was growing up, and I fell in love with them, and it's
true.
not like I could relate to them, but I enjoyed the fact that they were adventurous, and things
Yes.
like that, the mystery, and
Wait,
all that. Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm. So you mentioned Italy, you mentioned France, and then you also mentioned that when you were in France, you started writing for kids. Also, when you were writing in France, were you writing in the French language as you were learning, or you were still writing in English?
I was so I was writing these short stories
Hmm.
aimed at children.
Hmm.
So I peppered my story. I wrote in English, but I peppered
Hmm.
them with French phrases, and
Hmm.
and it was always experimental. I wanted to see how far I could take any language,
Hmm.
right? I mean, my family in my family in Singapore, we're very multilingual, because Singapore is a very multilingual nation. You just walk out the street, you can hear so many languages spoken,
Hmm.
from European to East Asian to South Asian languages. So
Hmm.
multilingualism has never been like, it's never been I take it, I take it for granted, let's just say. I can
Ah,
very
okay.
blame, right? And because I was surrounded by different languages when I was
Hmm.
growing up. So for me, language is about experimenting, right?
Hmm.
And stories are made up of
Sure.
languages,
Hmm.
right? Not just one. I mean, visual language is also a language. So picture books come into play in this. And I just have fun doing that.
Hmm. Interesting. Speaking of languages, how many languages do you speak proficiently?
Oh, so English is my mother tongue, which is quite strange to hear, but I will explain that a little while in a
Okay.
bit. So English is my mother tongue, so I've always spoken English. My mother brought me up in English, so that's why it's my mother tongue, right? I speak Mandarin, which is the
Hmm.
second language that I had to learn at school. I also speak Cantonese, which is another Chinese language. Um, Italian, because my husband's family is Italian, and they don't speak English, so I've had to learn to speak Italian. And French, which I learned before I learned to speak Italian. So um, and at a time I was also learning Russian. I'm not saying I can speak Russian, but
Hmm.
I can read Russian.
Okay.
I can read the Cyrillic letters, which I find very exciting and very fun. um, yeah, so I think language is a way to communicate, and if you understand multiple languages, you understand how people convey and communicate. like why
Mm-hmm.
certain words are chosen, why certain words are not, why it's better
Mm-hmm.
to use this word and not that word. And that helps me in writing actually.
Hmm.
Like it
Interesting.
helps me in characterization actually also.
Hmm. Okay. Interesting. And just to touch on that, navigating around different countries as a creative bit again, I'm curious to find out, when you move across these countries, whether it be Italy or France or back to Southeast Asia, do you, I don't know, get do you find certain communities, creative communities, like writing communities, that you join or
Mm.
go to their events and the likes? Do you do any of those?
Yeah, I do. I do. So it's in France when I was living there.
Hmm.
There is a SCBWI in France. I knew about it. I didn't join it officially, but I knew that there was a group there, and people did meet up. I think it's now called SCBWI Europen.
Hmm.
So people from Italy maybe, or but there was one active in France. In Paris actually. And then when I left Paris to go to Singapore, to move to Singapore, I joined SCBWI there. There was a chapter there, and I got to meet a lot of other authors like me. I also got to meet, and what I was really very pleased about is that I got to meet Southeast Asian authors writing in English for children.
Hmm.
Which was,
There,
as I
there in
said,
Singapore.
yes, there in Singapore, which I said is very rare here.
Hmm.
So and there's such great writers there in Singapore writing for children. Waiting for a big break in the sense that waiting to get an agent, or querying. And I've read some of their books, and they're just great books, and they're all inclusive, and includes people like them, people like me, people
Hmm.
like our children,
Hmm.
right? And then when I returned again to the UK, back to London, I joined again. I mean, not that I stopped joining. I've always been part of SCBWI.
Hmm.
I started to volunteer for them, more, what's that word? More deeply, I suppose. So I've taken up roles with SCBWI, British Isles, and it's been great, like being around like-minded people, being able to talk about books for children, why we write for children, you
Hmm.
know our experiences with agents and publishers, and just learning about the publishing industry,
Hmm.
through the writing community.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I should put this out there in case of people listening who may not be familiar with Scooby. SCBWI is the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and that's how I met Eva Wong,
Mm,
by attending the conference twice now. First in 2022, and then in 2023. So, amazing organization to be a part of. Yeah. And next question for me is around organizations and affiliations. So that's a good entry point into that. Can
mhm,
you talk us through your different organizations? I mean, I've seen Scooby on your website, again, Society for Children's Book Writers and Organizations. There's, BCA, or if I may call it that,
mhm,
BESCA, there's Kid
mhm,
Lead SCA. You're
mm.
affiliated with these different organizations. Can you talk us through them? What you do there?
Yeah, it seems quite a lot. Um, so I'll talk about KidLit SEA. So KidLit SEA was something that a friend and I had set up when I was living in Singapore. She's a Singaporean, um, writer and also a publisher. She's an independent publisher. She publishes her own books under the publishing name of Pepper Dog Press,
Hmm.
and these are stories that are of and about Singapore. Um, and Her name is Ewon, and Ewon and I got together after we got to know each other, because we came from this stance, or this standing point that where there are very few books about the history of Singapore in Singapore for children. You
Hmm.
know, it would seem that at least I found when I was living there, that people were just more interested to read about other worlds and other histories, right? Other than their rather than their own. And we wanted to promote also literatures from Southeast Asia for children. So people from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from the Philippines that are writing in their own home countries. And we wanted to pull together a community. So we founded Kitlit SEA, and we tried to do that, and we did some things over the pandemic, because the we of the pandemic. So we did something online. We gave space, like what you're doing now. We spoke to people about their work, and it's just to elevate and promote Southeast Asian kidlit. um BSEA, or BESEA,
Hmm.
was something that is founded by three British East and Southeast Asian uh, girls, I would say women,
Hmm.
who wanted also to elevate and promote um, East and Southeast Asian voices and businesses, and they came together and formed a group called BESEA.N, Be Seen,
Hmm.
right?
Ah, Basin.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And then there is Maisie Chan, whom I mentioned earlier. She set up bubble tea, the bubble tea writing network, basically together British East and Southeast Asians living here, or East and Southeast Asians living in Britain, in Great Britain, and giving us a community to support one another. So I'm very grateful for that, because when I came back to London again, that was the first thing I found.
Hmm.
A community of like-minded East and Southeast Asians, kind of like I found my people, I guess, in that
Mhm.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. And these
Mm.
organizations, how have they been beneficial to you?
Um, Yes, I mean, it's support. I mean, whatever organizations you join, or anyone joins, right? You get back what you give out, isn't it? So if
Mhm.
you give out more, you get back more, right?
Mhm.
So for me, I find, I've always advocated for the volunteer sector. I volunteered many years of my life at my children's schools, at centers teaching English as a foreign language. I've done that, and I continue to do that. So to give back, you get back what you give back, I guess.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I support. I try my best, I would say, to support easier initiatives. When there is a British East, or when there's an East and Southeast Asian writer writing, I seek out their books, right? And
Hmm.
I try to promote and elevate them.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Can you give me a sense of the size of these organizations? I mean, I know Scooby has a
Mm.
huge membership base. Uh, at the likes of Bessia and the Kit Lead SCA. Can you give me a sense of their size?
Oh, I couldn't actually. I guess we're in the thousands, I would say.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's quite. I mean, we are spread out all over the UK. I mean, Maisie is in Scotland.
Mhm.
Um, so I think we are quite a few of us.
Hmm. So,
Yeah.
but when you say thousands, that's thousands of members within the UK, though, not even spread
Yeah.
across the world, just within the
Yeah.
UK.
Yeah,
Yeah,
in the UK. Yeah.
that's a sizable number, though.
I think it's quite sizable. Although
Mhm.
as a community of people, we are smaller compared to the African Caribbean community, compared to
Ah,
the South Asian community, let's just say. We are quite small in
okay.
numbers. Yeah.
Hmm. And I'm also, and at this point that you mentioned that I should also ask about events. So I know the first event that I attended in the UK was the Black British Book Festival in Birmingham, was at
Mm.
that point in, I think it was in 2021. And
Mm-hmm.
then last year's was quite huge, it was quite big, I should say, compared to the previous one that held in London. So do you have a similar thing for the Southeast Asian, writers community? Do you have this sort of events that people can attend that hold, say, I don't know, on an annual basis? Do you have them?
Yes. So last year, a group of us, Candy Gole included, Tanya Tay, Anne Chan, who is, an emerging writer, um, Alice Yu. she writes fantasy for adult, and and Elizabeth Wong, we got together and formed an ECEA literary festival
Hmm.
that was held at SOAS. So that was our first festival, and we're planning one again this year. To be in September. September
Hmm.
is actually the East and Southeast Asian Heritage Month in the UK. It's
Ah,
not an
nice.
officially recognized month, and the people from BC, the group of girls that I mentioned earlier, the
Hmm.
women from BC, they have petitioned the government to make this an official month, because in the UK at the moment we have South Asian Heritage Month, which is in April, and in
Hmm.
October, I think it's October, we have Black History Month, right? But we have yet to have a East and Southeast Asian Heritage Month, and
Hmm.
it's only fair to actually ask for one to be, I mean,
Yes.
to make it official. So at the moment, it's not yet official, but the people in the community know about it. So in September we celebrate that. So the literary festival took place last September at SOAS, and we
Hmm.
had quite a we had a really good turnout. Basically, the tickets were all sold
Oh,
out.
nice. Oh, that's
Yeah, we had
interesting.
people coming, traveling from outside of London, coming in as well. So it tells us, or at least it's told us, the organizers, that this is very much needed,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm. Yeah, and when you mentioned the Black History Month and the South Asian Month, I'm curious though, the Southeast Asian Month that you're advocating for, the fact that it's not yet official, does it go back to something you mentioned earlier, which is about the fact that they regard Southeast Asia as the Far East, and it almost seems like it's would that
yeah,
be a reason?
I don't know what the reasons are. I mean, I suspect that the reasons are that our numbers are small, you know,
Ah, compared
and
to the
yeah, and we are very diverse. If you think about East Asia, being China, Mongolia, Japan, and Korea, and Southeast Asia being 11 countries. Although we seem to be a monolith, we are not, right? We are such a diverse community of people, but yet our numbers are small in a sense, right?
Hmm.
Smaller in comparison in the UK. I mean, there are more East and Southeast Asians in the USA, I would say.
Hmm.
You know, so but we do exist here as a community, and it's just sad that we're kind of invisible, in a sense, right?
Hmm.
So I think the people who want this to happen, the people who like us or like me, East and Southeast Asian, um, who want us to be seen,
Hmm.
heard, we're advocating for more of that, and it's through books, which I would say books and media are two very important sectors, I suppose, publishing and media, right? Because if you cannot see us in books and you cannot see us on TV, in films, we are invisible.
Hmm.
You know? Yeah.
Hmm. Interesting. I mean, I
Mhm.
like that you mentioned that because I mean, I'm getting a lot of education from this myself. I'll be honest, because I personally had thought of you as a monolith. So when I think about I mean, usually I think of Asia as okay, Southeast Asia, and then yeah, just out Southeast Asia, and for whatever reason, I'd often or well incorrectly sort of collapsed all the countries
Mm,
into that one region. So whether it be Japan or China or the Philippines
yeah.
or it just seems to be, I don't know, it just seems because I do a lot of work. I do a lot. My assistant is Filipino, for example,
Hmm.
and every time I see her and I see a Chinese and I see a Singaporean, like it just seems to me like there's a common culture
Yeah.
amongst all of them. But now I'm learning that it's a lot more diverse than we think it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I mean, the flip side is that people make the same sort of assumptions, I guess, say with Africa, right?
Mhm.
People even just think, a lot of people used to think that Africa was a country rather than a continent,
Yeah.
and that all Africans are the same, right?
Mhm.
Even though Nigerians are very different from Cameroonians, very different from Sudanese, and
Mhm.
you know um, I guess there's always this kind of tendency. I think for me as a child growing up in Southeast Asia, I used to think all Europeans were the same.
Hmm.
They were Europeans, right? And
Hmm.
you kind of didn't divide them into like, oh, I mean Italians or French, or they were just
True.
white. They were just white people, you know,
Hmm. Yeah, true.
right? And I think that this kind of assumption or conflation happens everywhere,
Hmm.
and it's until we kind of educate ourselves, right?
I agree.
Then we realize that, I mean, there's so many, like even Italians. I used to think, oh, Italian people are just Italians, until I married my husband, and I realized that Italian Norths are different from the Southern Italians, different from the
Really?
Western Eastern Italians, you know, right? So no, no, I don't think any country or any people or any community is a monolith, because we cannot
Hmm.
be, right? We can't
Interesting. I mean,
be. We are all diverse, right? And multivariate in our own ways. So
hmm.
it's trying to find the similarities and that unite us, rather than the differences that divide us, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I agree. The more the more we see and hear these things, which is why books are very important, which is why the
Hmm.
media is very important, because I mean they help educate us. And I always think about this from the context of my daughter, who's also an inspiration behind this podcast, also, because then she can get to see and you just sort of see different worlds, yeah, by listening
Wonderful.
or watching as she grows up. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I'm going to jump into something that has been on my mind for a long time, and
Okay.
so I first found out about this at the Scooby conference, which is sensitivity reading, or
Mm,
sensitivity reader as you are. And this
yeah.
was during one of the breakout sessions we had with I forget her name now. Oh, Jasmine from Story Mix Studio, and yourself,
Jasmine
and then one of
Richards.
the,
Yes.
yeah, Jasmine
Yes.
Richards, yeah, and then one other lady, and then you were talking about your role as a sensitivity reader. You would get, I mean, I'll just let you speak about that. What does that entail? What does that, because you'll be amazed that not a lot of people know about what that role, if not even know about that role, let alone what the role entails. So I'll just let you speak on that. What is, who are you as a
Yeah.
sensitivity reader? What does it entail?
Okay, thanks for asking this question. Actually, it gives me a chance to explain the work I do. I mean, it's also a very sensitive topic, as that breakout masterclass at the conference showed us, right? Because a lot of people don't understand what it is. So many people think it's a censorship thing.
Mhm.
Sensitivity readers or editors are out there to censor the person, or um, so first and foremost, um, I for me, for what I do, because every sensitivity reader is different, right? Just as a definition, what they do, or what we do as sensitivity readers, is that we read manuscripts before they're published for things, for areas of concerns, of red flag areas. And this has to do with, say, I read specifically for East and Southeast Asian representation. So if
Mhm.
there's a manuscript, a publisher will come to me. If they have an author, maybe also an author would come to me themselves. And if they're writing about, say, Southeast Asia, or maybe Singapore or Malaysia specifically, um, but they're not writing from within that community, so they're outsiders,
Mhm.
and they want to have a story with a Singaporean character, for example, right? And the publisher also has no knowledge of, or very little knowledge. They will then outsource this to a sensitivity reader like me, and my job is actually editorial. I will look over the manuscript. I will say, okay, this maybe this area needs a little bit of attention, and I will say why it needs attention, and I will explain. I said I It's always backed by research, so I will send a link, and I'll say, okay, why this would be why this may be considered offensive, right? So, for example, I was doing a sensitivity read of a middle grade book, and in I was asked to read for a character who is East Asian,
Mhm.
but the character I didn't find problems with. What I found that had an issue was how the author had made fun of a character who is Muslim, in the book and of his beard. And I said, even though that was not my remit, but because I'm wearing an editor's hat,
Mhm.
I flagged it up and I said that that would cause offense because for a Muslim man, his beard is actually quite holy.
Hmm.
And 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 I sent links, and the author actually came back to me through his publisher and thanked me for it because they didn't know, right?
Hmm.
So I mean, there are things like that. Obviously, now that I've mentioned it, I think the listeners would understand that sensitivity readers are not a monolith. Again, we read for different things.
Mhm.
I
Hmm.
I read for children's literature. I mean, sometimes adults, depending on the projects I get. I work freelance. Mostly, I work with children's publishers.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks for mentioning that, because one of the first things that crossed my mind when I heard that at the conference was I'm a huge fan of there's a Nigerian writer called Chimamanda Adichie,
Yes.
and
Me too.
Chimamanda, yeah, so Chimamanda has a book out there called Purple Hibiscus, and
Mm,
Purple Hibiscus. When I read that book, I loved it so much because I could relate to certain things. She talked about, she was talking about this era where the military were in government, and
mm,
I could sort of relate to things that she was talking about, how the economy sort of was grinding to a halt, you know, and it was an interesting book. But when I mean, I read it a long time ago, and then when I heard you speak about sensitivity reading at the conference, I thought, oh, so perhaps someone like Chimamanda might have had a sensitivity reader who's well versed in the Nigerian, I don't know,
mm.
history,
That
for example, over the years. I mean, again, it was just something that popped. I don't know if that
Yeah,
she
that's
used
a
one, but yeah.
That's actually a great point. She might or might not have used one, right? But if she'd done her research and she knows what she's talking about, I mean,
Mhm,
she is Nigerian herself, so
mhm,
she would have. I mean, she had lived in Nigeria, so she's not Nigerian that has not lived in Nigeria, right? So she has
mhm,
lived in Nigeria. And I mean, I'm just assuming that this is the history she knows. So these are
mm,
called own voices stories, right? Where you're writing from your own culture within your own culture.
mm,
She might have asked, say, a history professor, for example,
mm,
who knows about Nigerian history for as part of her research. Let's just say. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if she has. I'm just saying that she
mm,
may have done that.
mm.
So for sensitivity reading, usually the writer is not from the culture they're writing from. So,
Okay.
or the writer could be someone from the culture, but has been brought up outside that culture. So,
Mm,
someone say, I mean, I'm just giving examples here. Say someone who is maybe Singaporean but adopted by white parents, for example, and
mhm,
the Singaporean adoptee is writing about Singapore but has never lived there, or doesn't know. I mean, through her research, she knows some, but not a lot. And so maybe the author would come to me and ask me to vet the or read through her manuscript for accuracy and authenticity, things like that. Yeah.
hmm. Okay. Yeah. Good thing you mentioned that, because I was also going to ask about if it matters uh that it's fiction or non-fiction. So does it matter though if it's non-fiction to have a
Um,
sensitivity writer? Oh, sorry, reader.
So for nonfiction, so going back to my point that all these readers, I mean, we are just called this by the industry because
Mm,
of, I guess we read for sensitive issues. So the kind of the label just stuck. So there are lots of labels for this, right? Some of us are called authenticity readers. Some of us are called cultural research readers.
mhm,
Um, I mean, it kind of doesn't, for me, labels don't really matter because it's whatever we do, the job is the same, right? So for nonfiction, um, what nonfiction writers do, they would get editors, other people in their peer to vet. Like if
mhm,
you're writing about if you're say, I mean, just on top of my head, if you're a neurosurgeon writing about neurosurgery for example, right?
mhm,
You would get a neurosurgeon friend to read through and say, what do you think? Is this okay? Blah blah. Maybe they
Mhm.
don't. Maybe they do. I don't know. But
Mm,
nonfiction has its own set of perimeters and its own set of readers for those.
okay, interesting. And in terms of your roles, because you mentioned something about, you do this on a freelancing basis. I'm just curious though, what services you're currently tapping into as from a business point of view, as a professional writer, what services are you currently tapping?
As in, what I offer, or
Yes, yes,
what
from
I
a business
offer.
point of view, yes.
Okay, so I offer an editorial service. I have a company called the Writing Essentials, which offers services like sensitivity reading, structural and copy editing, and coaching, writing. I'm also a writing coach. I um, I am also a ghostwriter. So
Mm,
basically, people who want to write books, and kind of don't have the know-how, or they seek my help, or they seek any help of a ghostwriter, right?
mhm,
So I do that. I predominantly focus on memoirs. So um,
mm,
that's what I do to help people who want to write their memoirs.
mm,
So that's quite a long-term project, and I don't take these projects easily, as a because it's a lot of planning, it's a lot of getting to know the person, it's getting
yeah.
to write in that person's shoes. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
S-
Ghost write, yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I'm
Oh,
done. Yeah.
I was gonna say ghost writing. I was gonna ask
Mm,
more about the ghost writing service. Do
mm.
you have any specific genres, like, or is that the one you meant for only memoirs, or do you do the same for children's books? Or
Oh, no, I don't do. I haven't ghost written for a children's book author yet. I ghost write for adults.
Mhm,
So the genre is memoir,
mhm,
and I write in. I think the style of writing, or the voice of the writing, is creative non-fiction. So
mm.
basically, it's a type of writing that reads like fiction, but is non-fiction. Let's just say,
Ah, okay.
yeah.
So when it comes to children's books like this one, you only do this for yourself, then in person, not as a ghost
Yeah,
writing service.
yeah, so this is my my role as an author, right?
Mm,
So I have forthcoming books. I work in picture books predominantly, and writing a middle grade at the moment, working on a middle grade. Yeah. So yeah, so that's what I do as Eva Wong Nava, the author.
okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And that leads me to my next question, which is around your current and future projects. What are you
Mm.
currently working on? What are your future plans? Do you have a wish list of collaborations or collaborative projects on, that you'd want to share with us?
Okay. I'm very ambitious. I think I have a lot of dreams.
Ah,
Um, so I have a book coming out in March, which is East Asian folk tales, myths, and legends. That's coming out with Scholastic on March 14th. So
interesting.
it's 16 stories of folk tales, myths, and legends from East Asia. So Japan, Korea, China, and Mongolia.
Mhm.
Um, I would love to write one on Southeast Asia, because we have 11 countries in Southeast Asia with their unique folk tales, lore, myths, and legends, but we don't have very many books on them.
Hmm,
So I
interesting.
would love to work on that. That's on my wish list.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and I also have another picture book coming out in June this year, and that is a non-fiction, and it's on the history of music for children. Yeah,
Okay, history of music for children,
yeah,
not from a
yeah.
is it specific to any, I don't know, is it specific to Southeast Asian music or is it the
No,
general?
uh, it's general, but I have added Southeast Asian music in it. So basically, it
Okay.
looks at music movements, I would say, from
Ah, okay.
classical to jazz, to folk and all that. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Okay, that's interesting. I'm looking forward to your books. Looking forward to the musical one in June.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
also the one coming out, the folklore ones coming out in March would also be interesting because I mean, I find that children tend to enjoy folklores, and that's what
Mm.
I mean, that's what I grew up with, under my grandmother. You hear lots of these folk
Yes,
tales and things like that,
exactly.
so it should be
Yeah,
relatable, I suppose. uh
yeah.
and then in terms of working, where can people find you, Eva, for people who are out there looking to work with you or who might like to work with you? How might they go about that?
Yeah, just I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and if you just Google me, Eva Wong Nava, you'll find my website, and it lists all the things that I can help you with there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So one final bit from us is, do you have any tips for outstanding, any tips for creatives or writers out there who might want to follow in your footsteps?
Oh, um, just write. Just do what you want to do. At this point, if you're looking to be published, write first. Don't think about the publishing yet, because that will come naturally when you write the story that comes from your heart. I always think, yeah.
Hmm,
I don't
interesting.
really have that many tips, but if you want to be a writer, you just have to write.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, Eva.
Oh, pleasure. Pleasure's mine.
Yeah, this has been very educative for me too. So yeah, I mean, I look forward to sharing this with the rest of the world, and that's the
Thank
beauty of
you.
doing this. We've come to the end of this, by the way. But again, this is the beauty of this for me because let me stop the recording first.